Our presentation addresses the question, does emotional labour in service work promote gendered occupational segregation? And it will be presented by myself, Nupa Naik, Bethany Edge and Nicole Morby. We shall begin our presentation by discussing the key concepts that have been raised within the question, and then we will highlight some of the key theory from the literature in order to explain the existence of gendered occupational segregation. Following on from this, we will discuss the nature of our personal experience in healthcare and human resources. We will then conclude the presentation and answer the set questions that were given to us. As you can see from this slide, each member of our group will present different sections of the presentation. I will now hand over to Beth, who will explain the key concepts.
The first concept introduced in the question is that of service work. Service work involves doing something for businesses or households and not producing a physical, tangible good. It can be broken down into 4 different subsectors, namely producer, distributive, personal and social services. These categories involve different activities from financial and insurance services to government, health and hospitality, all of which require differing levels of skill, include different employment conditions and serve different primary economic functions. However, the one feature that will be referred to throughout this presentation is the ratio of men to women in service work. In the producer and distributive services, there are more men than women, and this may be because they involve manual occupations such as transport, insurance and finance-related occupations that conform to the dominant discourse of masculinity. However, there are less men than women in the personal and social services, which involve higher levels of interaction with members of the public and as such require greater levels of emotion management. Another concept is emotional labour, which as defined by Hochschild involves the requirement of an occupation for workers to induce or suppress feelings in accordance with the dominant organisational habitus. The concept of emotional habitus regards the social identities, statements and beliefs that are prevalent in embodied social practice, and thus it influences how people carry out and feel about their work. Each habitus has a dominant emotionology according to Feynman, which is an embedded system of feelings that can be shaped by organisations and society at large. The ability to convey pleasant emotions is a paramount feature of service work, as it improves the quality of interaction with clients and customers and sustains the organisation's demeanour. In today's society, emotions are treated as tradable social resources and commodities which can be negotiated and manipulated by organisations. In some service organisations, people are hired on their presumed capacity to perform emotion work, in essence, to be a smiling face, which could be argued to provide greater opportunity for women to be recruited into these positions. Gendered occupational segregation has been at the centre of debates regarding gender inequality, as it concerns a tendency for men and women to be employed in different occupations. Segregation has been considered to have a role to play in the gender pay gap, as it can impose constraints upon career opportunities and is seen to be the underlying root of the inequality that we see today. An example of occupational segregation is that men working in the service sector form the majority in professional finance-related occupations, which often pay higher wages than those jobs that appear to attract more women, such as social and personal services.
We will now identify some statistics that indicate that emotional labour creates a division between the two genders. According to research by Meyer, a 1% increase in female teachers would reduce the teacher turnover rate by 12%, thus indicating that women are more highly committed to this form of service work, which has consequent positive effects on the student success rate. This also shows that women are able to contribute to the emotional labour easier than men and thus remain in the occupation for longer. Another study conducted by Williams found that the proportion of flight attendants reflected on the process of conducting emotional labour as taxing. They also found that women were more able to cope with the requirements of the job than men. thus proposing one possible reason why men do not choose to partake in interactive service work. The first theory that we will now discuss is the business case. The business case approach to gendered occupational segregation is centered around finding the best person for the job with the appropriate skills, knowledge, and experience. Employers have been found to test the skills of individuals and make decisions based upon one's ability to conform to the dominant habitus and provide total customer satisfaction through being polite and appearing happy. However, Hochschild claims that service workers are required to suppress their personal emotions during interactions with customers, thus placing extra pressure onto them. In addition, this can lead to employees surface acting, whereby they display the required emotions without feeling them. This is used to ensure that they provide a good level of service under the supervision of managers. It has been argued by Humphrey et al. That some employees enjoy the sentimental aspect of emotional labor as they are able to incorporate their own personality into their work, thus making the service that they offer more authentic. For example, Schuler and Seiper found that in the 911 emergency call handling center, the employees, although they found their job stressful at times, also found it to be rewarding as they were able to make a real-life difference to people's lives. However, people who are inherently negative in their attitudes may struggle to emit the positive attitudes required in this occupation. We will now discuss the nature of masculinity. Due to the expansion of the service sector, low-skilled men have been put at risk as the traditional manual and masculine jobs in agriculture and manufacturing are being outsourced. Men have a tendency to be defensive when challenged, which does not typically fit in with the ideals of emotional labor. The social identity theory suggests that people categorize themselves into groups based upon their occupation, gender, and age, and thus their job carries significance for their identity. For example, the healthcare sector requires a lot of emotion work, which is seen to be feminine, and thus men may be reluctant to undertake this work due to the impact that it could have on the sense of self.
Another theory is gender stereotyping. Stereotypes have played a significant role in causing the segregation of men and women. They have such a dominant influence due to the social stigmas and attitudes that employers and other organizational figures hold towards the concept of women's work. Women are typically associated with being emotional and nurturing, and thus they often occupy positions within sectors involving high levels of emotional labor, such as education and healthcare. Women are subject to the other stereotypes, such as the expectation for them to stay at home and care for the children, whilst the husband works long hours. This puts women at a disadvantage when they apply for promotions or to work in male-dominated occupations, as the roles often expect the employee to be decisive and readily available at any hour of the day, which conforms more to the stereotypical masculine characteristics. Emotional labor is seen to conform to feminine stereotypes, as they involve nurturing and being responsive to customers. However, when men undertake this, they are often paid at a higher rate, which again is disadvantageous to women. It is important, however, to acknowledge that everyone is different and that stereotypes do not take this into consideration. The stereotypes that are attributed to women can prevent them from being able to progress through the ranks in organizations. Being a manager is viewed as a male-dominated occupation due to the concept of the individual needing to be able to make decisions based on facts rather than on emotion, as well as the ability to be aggressive rather than scared to take risks. It can be argued that there will always be resistance when individuals deviate from the stereotypical behaviors expected from them. And as such, women who do progress in organizations are likely to experience negativity from their peers, which acts as a barrier to entry for them. However, times are changing and women are breaking the stereotypes that were previously attributed to them. It has been stated that women are more trusted to take over a struggling company because they tend to know the business from the bottom up, allowing them to make decisions which will be in the best interest of the company as a whole. Also, women are increasingly more career-driven
meaning that male-dominated occupations are being revolutionized by the concept of emotional labor, and masculinity is no longer an essential characteristic for top managers. The next section of this presentation focuses upon our personal experiences in employment. My personal experience as a human resources intern has taught me a lot about the roles of both men and women within organizations. I have observed a clear trend in which women are predominantly employed within the support functions, and the males within the organizations were heavily concentrated within senior management roles. This observation is supported by the research conducted by Legg that found that men received more promotions than their female counterparts, regardless of who was the better fit for the role, because the women were too valuable in interactive support function roles. However, the concept of emotional intelligence is of increasing significance in human resources departments, as it promotes effective decision making, which suggests that there is an increasing need for feminine characteristics within this workplace. Another observation that I have made is that the support staff engage in a process of surface acting on a regular basis, as they are expected to empathize with employees' complaints and issues when they may not actually agree with their point of view, so they perform the emotions instead. In this, it is important to remember that not every female worker identifies with the feminine stereotypes, and thus they may be more career-driven and conform to the ideals of masculinity instead.
The other case study that this presentation shall now outline is healthcare and pharmacy work within the UK. I have personal experience in working for a local pharmacy as both a healthcare assistant and dispenser, and have made several observations throughout the duration of my employment. The dominant habitus within healthcare work is to be caring and empathetic towards the patients, as they are often in a rather vulnerable state, as they are not feeling well for the most of the time. This caring nature of the work attracts the common label of women's work, as it plays to the innate characteristics that women are expected to possess, and as such men often believe that such work undermines their masculinity and prefer not to undertake it. The ability to manage one's emotions and maintain a pleasant demeanour is a skill that every member of the healthcare sector requires in order to maintain constructive relationships with patients. This involves significant emotional management, and in hospitals, for example, nurses often suffer from compassion fatigue if they are unable to successfully separate their real emotions from those regarding work. In other words, the habitus or social world of the hospital exerts a degree of control over those who work there, which may be exhausting. As I have previously mentioned, my personal experience lies within the community pharmacy sector of healthcare work, which also displays interesting divides between men and women. As shown in these three pictures from the three of the most prominent pharmacy groups, nearly all of those wearing company tunics and uniforms are women, which are undertaking the assistant's role and are the first point of contact for all of the patients and visitors to the pharmacy branch. The men are predominantly wearing suits and have discretion over how they dress, as long as they maintain the professional image of the pharmacy. This is a reflection of their increased status as pharmacists and branch managers. This divide could be explained in terms of men's reluctance to engage in low-level customer-facing service work, which involves engaging in emotional labour on a more frequent basis, as they have chosen to work in the professional roles which elevates them above the women. This conforms to the dominant discourse of hegemonic masculinity. However, the stereotypes surrounding emotional labour are changing, and so is the composition of the pharmacy workforce, as women still perform a lot of the lower level work, but within the pharmacist occupation there is a balance between the two sexes. Following on from this, we shall now discuss the reasons why emotional labour may not be the main cause for gendered occupational segregation. Although there is established literature that explains the difference between the work that men and women typically undertake, it can be argued that it is not simply the case that men are unable to perform interaction-based service work. Firstly, emotions can be argued to be a biological given, as everyone inherits the capacity to feel, and these emotions are visible on one's face. Society considers those who do not display emotion to be either psychopathic or autistic, according to research by Gergen conducted in 1992. This suggests that men have the same capacity to display emotion as women, and thus they are both equally equipped to perform interactive service work. Other research conducted by Feynman in 2007 argues that service work involves the performance of emotions that align to the microstructure of each individual situation. In some respects, this draws us to the same conclusion, that surely both genders can perform emotions at the same level, and thus there technically should be no difference between gendered segregation based upon the prevalence of emotional labour. Further to this, the attitudes of both men and women have changed within the recent generations, and there is an increasing tendency for people to resist the gender binaries and stereotypes. Increasingly, men comfortably engage with culturally coded feminine tasks and minimise their difference from women. This shows a significant shift towards a more equal and less segregated society, where anyone can undertake any form of work. Occupational segregation may not simply be a result of emotional labour, instead it may be partly due to gendered lifestyle choices. It can be suggested that women are more likely to seek part-time jobs due to childcare-related commitments, and these opportunities are more readily available within the service sector in jobs that require emotional labour, such as hospitality, retail or bartending.
In conclusion, the academic literature does support the argument in which emotional labor does promote gendered occupational segregation. However, times are beginning to change and women are becoming more career-driven and willing to progress more. Also, the attitudes towards males entering into female-dominated occupations are changing, as they are becoming more comfortable with completing feminine tasks within the workplace. Overall, there is a clear shift away from this towards gender equality within the workforce.
We will now answer the set questions for a chosen topic. Question 1 is, how has your experience highlighted different gender expectations? Nicole's experience as a human resources intern has reaffirmed the idea that contemporary gender expectations are changing and that women are becoming more career-driven. However, men still occupy the higher status positions within the organization and do not undertake any form of emotional labor. In addition, Bethany's experience within pharmacy reflects this same tendency, although the professional occupations of pharmacist is balanced in terms of gender disposition.
Question 2 is, what is the impact of emotional labor you identify on employees? It has been shown within the literature that when service workers such as nurses are undertaking emotional labor on a constant basis, it can lead to a phenomenon called compassion fatigue and burnout, whereby they are unable to separate their own personal emotions from those that they are required to display within their work. Also, the requirement of the employees to engage with both deep and surface acting can be difficult when they have to ignore how they are personally feeling.
Question 3 is, do you think gendered occupational segregation is justifiable? From one perspective, gendered occupational segregation is not justifiable, as we all inherit the same capabilities to feel and display emotions, and men are equally as capable in performing the same jobs as women. However, regardless of one's position on whether it is justifiable, the case still exists that some men want to maintain their masculine identity and feel that some form of social pressure to partake only in the traditional masculine occupations, such as transport and distributive services, which involve higher levels of manual work and less customer interaction. The following few slides contain the references for all of the literature that has informed our presentation. Thank you for watching.